Welcome to August One for All. We are just allowing everybody to enter the meeting. We've still got people joining. So if you can just be patient with us while we allow everybody to come in, and then we'll just formally open the session in a few minutes. Hello to those who've just joined us. Welcome to August One for All. We're just allowing everybody to join the meeting. You will notice you've joined in mute, just so that we can control the sound levels. If you can be patient while we just get everybody in. We've got quite a lot of people joining today, so you're coming in groups. Once everybody's in, we'll start the meeting. So welcome to those of you who've just joined us. Welcome to the August One for All. We've got quite a lot of people joining us today, so as people are coming in tranches, I'm letting them in. You will notice you've joined in mute so that we can control the volume for the speakers. If you can just be patient with us for a few minutes whilst I let everybody in and get everybody set up, and then we'll start the meeting. And there's still more people coming in. So it is 3 o'clock, so I'm going to kick us off. We currently have 52 participants in the meeting at the moment. We are expecting more, so I'm going to keep an eye on the waiting room and let people in as they arrive, but really keen that we have a prompt start because we've got a packed agenda for you today. So firstly, if I can give my welcome to you to the Women's Utility Network event for August in conjunction with Energy Assets. They are one of the Women's Utility Network sponsors, and they have organised some fantastic speakers for you for today's event. In terms of just getting the meeting set up in terms of Zoom protocols and all that, you will have noticed you've joined in mute because if you didn't hear the number when you first joined, we now have 55 participants and we're expecting potentially 100 people on the call today. So if I could ask you to stay in mute for the session, we're going to try and do all the questions that you might have in the chat function, because it's quite difficult to have a Q&A with open mics with so many of you on the call. If you can just all check that you can find the chat function now. Angie's just put a note in there about popping any questions for the speakers in the chat function, so you should be able to see that there. So by all means, say hello to anybody in the room. if you're going to raise a question, a generic question for any of our speakers today, then if you just add it to everybody so we can all see it, because it might just be that I was thinking, oh, I'm actually going to ask that question as well, and then I don't need to repeat it. If you want to direct a question to a specific speaker, then you know, please at the person in the message tool so we know specifically who you want to ask. As I said, welcome to the this August session. I didn't introduce myself, which I never do because I've done them so often now, I get out the habit of doing it. But I'm Hayley Monks, Managing Director at Think, Inspire, Create, but a co-founder of One. I'm also accompanied today by two other co-founders. We've got Angie Needle, who might give us a wave in her box, and Joe Butlin. These are, for those of you who've been on a regular basis, we did them weekly throughout the majority of lockdown, and we're doing them monthly going forward. Today's session is in conjunction with energy assets. All your questions and everything we're going to do at the end. So we've got 3 speakers coming up for you today. We'll do a Q&A at the end if you put all your questions in mute. And then we'll sort of manage everything else as we go along. I'll keep an eye on the waiting room for anybody else who wants to join. If you've got any specific technical issues or you have problems, if you message me directly, so if you message Hayley in your chat, I'll see what I can do to help, because I'll be here in the background facilitating the movement of the slides and the speakers. So those are all the kind of instructions, domestic. I'm going to now hand over to Jen Fahey from Energy Assets. Welcome, Jen.
I'll unmute. Hello, everybody. Thank you for joining us this afternoon now. I'm just going to start off the session by talking a bit about some of our lockdown lessons, the experiences of energy assets, and some things that we've learned on this journey. I think it's safe to say that we can all agree 2020 has been a very tough year to date. I think COVID-19 has impacted us all in one way or another, both professionally but also personally, as we've came through this journey. I think utility companies in general do have a strong track record when it comes to preparing for emergencies, but I don't think anyone could quite have been ready for what COVID-19 brought to the table. I think even the best thought out and thoroughly tested business continuity plans were put to the test. They were redefined, they were adapted again, in order for us to really fully address the fast moving and unknown variables of an outbreak such as COVID-19. I think from our point of view, we've had to pivot again in order to stay on top of the fluid nature of world events. I think for us as an organisation, what has been important throughout was that we put our core values at the heart of our decision making, and we focused on some key principles. First one, and one that is always key for us, is safety. You know, as a priority, we focused on the safety of our customers and our employees throughout. We focused on commitment, and that was really to deliver our commitments to the country's energy infrastructure as we headed into a UK-wide lockdown. I think one close to my heart, which no doubt Dr. Bell will touch on later, was well-being. You know, it really was essential to support the health and well-being of our people throughout. Managing changing mental health needs, feelings of isolation and anxiety were all high on the agenda. And as I say, we'll hear more about that later on in the session. I think for energy assets, it was a busy time. COVID-19 aside, in the middle of the pandemic, we actually reached our 15th anniversary as a business in April. And towards mid-July, we also announced an acquisition. So both circumstances in which we would have been together as a business, we probably would have celebrated and marked those occasions. But unfortunately, the circumstances dictated that we were unable to be together during those big events. I think instead our focus was on taking steps to protect our people. We were also trying to maintain our operations and our business as usual in the best way we could. in what was quickly becoming our new normal. Our goals early on were to make sure that for our employees and our customers that we clarified the situation, that we reassured them, and we were also very keen to maintain a sense of calm when things were moving at quite a fast pace. We also wanted to maintain our productivity throughout, and then to do that we placed a lot of our trust in our employees to continue working remotely and to overcome some of the many challenges they were facing at home. But we were also very mindful that we had to look ahead to a recovery and what would happen next. I think it's fair to say that our response, like many others in the initial phases, was very tactical. We were focused on very reactive, short-term approach. We were very process-orientated, and really we had to find solutions very quickly to what was a changing circumstance. But I think very quickly we were then able to move on to a more strategic direction. We were looking more about anticipation, longer term focus, as things started to settle down. I think our journey as a business is probably like others in the sector. The initial phases saw us consistently following sort of government and NHS advice that was all designed around slowing the spread of the virus. But I think March 23, or March 23rd, should I say, marked probably one of the biggest steps for us when we really, with the safety of our people, our customers and the communities we serve at mind, we quickly switched from an office working environment to our working from home model. And that saw us close our offices, warehouses and sites. 1st of April was our next big event, and that was really when we all entered into that UK-wide lockdown. And as a company, we made an unprecedented decision, and the first in our history, to actually furlough a number of our employees. And that was really in response to a cessation of our non-critical activities. So we switched from having a fully active workforce to having to adapt our support, split our focus between a number of employees who have and still have, or still do remain active now, a number of employees who were placed on furlough, and also a number of workers who we still require to be out in the community responding to emergency and critical work. As an organisation, we're pleased that our operations never fully ceased. Throughout those early phases of lockdown, we did continue our support, and we continued with essential activities across our infrastructure, metering and data services. And now we're at today, so fast forward, some of you may be surprised to hear we're actually at day 150 of our new ways of working. We've got over 95% of our employees now back and active, and those still on furlough, we now have a plan to return them to our offices, hopefully by October. I say hopefully, if this year has taught us anything, it's that things change and they change quickly. But I think our key learnings, the first one's got to be communication, and I'll say communication and communication again. It really did become a priority. It's what brought us together and what kept us together. And that was ensuring that we communicated with employers, stakeholders, suppliers, partners, and making sure that we delivered at pace. We had to react daily, sometimes nightly, to changing government decisions. But our approach was regular communication with our team leaders, our senior managers, and also some visible leadership, which we hoped maintained morale and reassured our employees that we were all in this together. One key mantra for us throughout has been one size has not fitted all with COVID. We've had to address and deal with different government measures, different roadmaps, different plans. One of the big challenges for us was in particular around construction, which saw the reintroduction of construction in England, but not in Scotland and Wales. And those changing government advice is still with us today. So in response, we created a COVID response team. We're ready to take on the next challenge. And we've also introduced some dedicated COVID champions across each location in our business to make sure that we are actually giving people the support that they need locally and based on local measures. And I think a big one for me is just the change in employment landscape. I think working from home has most certainly not been without its challenges. For me, it was a 2-year-old. It was potty training and all those wonderful things that happens when you're at home. But I think utilities, like other sectors, are also now living proof that we can work from home. We can be productive, if not more. But importantly, I think we can be flexible and agile in our approach to work. I personally don't think anything beats face-to-face contact for building relationships, but I do think we have done a great job and we continue to do so. And I guess our company and others, this pandemic is a real opportunity to build a strategy that looks at new ways of working. Perhaps this is an opportunity for us to redefine what gender equality can look like in terms of roles, how we perform them, how the recruitment landscape might change. And I think finally looking ahead, you know, we are going to have to adapt to how we work. You know, we aren't going to be together anymore, so we need to think of new ways of nurturing talent. We need to think of new ways of training and developing our people when we can't bring everyone together. As I mentioned, recruitment is likely to change. You know, is 9 to 5 in an office likely to be the advert that will jump out? Possibly not. And I think as businesses, we also need to maintain our capacity to change and adapt. You know, this has been an ever-changing pandemic. It's likely to continue to change. And I guess I'll say it again, is just communicate, communicate and communicate. You know, we've learned quickly that we can't communicate enough, and that the communication we have delivered has been reassuring for our employees and customers. I think for me, and in summing up really, I'm personally very thankful to all our employees and our customers for their ongoing support and understanding. There's many members of my team on this call just now who have been a huge support throughout, you know, and I would like to thank them as well, but also to family and colleagues who have all understood when we've had a challenging day and who've worked together to overcome obstacles. I genuinely think that after COVID-19, we're truly ready for anything, and we can continue ambitiously with our business growth plans, and we certainly won't be letting COVID-19 stop us anytime soon. But yeah, so I think that's been our thoughts on the pandemic to date. No doubt that Alison will take you through some of the legal challenges, and then Dr. Bell can talk to you about some of those wellbeing challenges. But I'll thank you for your time, and I will pass back to Hayley.
Thanks, Jen. Thank you. Really great. So for anybody, I know there's a lot of people have joined as Jen's been talking. So if you've picked up some interesting bits from that, or you've got any questions, we're going to be taking a Q&A at the end of our 3 speakers, and you can put your questions in the chat whenever you want to. We'll pick them up as we go along. So if you've heard something interesting and you want to ask a question, then please do put it in the chat. I'm just going to share a slide on our next speaker so people can see as I introduce Alison Weatherhead. She leads Denton's People Reward and Mobility Practice in Scotland, and Alison's going to be talking to us about ongoing challenges as businesses move beyond furlough and equality issues in the new dynamic. I also have put in the chat, if you haven't already seen it, that our first 2 speakers don't have any slides, so you're not missing anything on the screen. Over to you, Alison.
Great, thanks, Hayley. Yes, Jen and I thought it would be nice to be able to speak with you this morning rather than having slides. So if you have there is the opportunity to put it on speaker view if I'm very, very small on your screen, but I do hope that you can all hear and see me. So as Jen was saying, I think we are beginning to move into perhaps a different phase in terms of COVID, and we've been thinking about this within my firm as something called the new dynamic rather than the new normal, because there is that sense in which the thing that we are all certain about is that we are going to have continuing and accelerated change. that the sense in which things are going to be moving slowly, or that we know what is round the corner, has perhaps disappeared, at least in the sort of short and middle term, but possibly in the longer term as well. That the one thing that we do know is that there is going to be change, and that change is going to be happening more and more quickly over the coming weeks and months and years. And this is something that all of us, no matter what our role in, that we very much need to be ready to deal with. I'm an employment lawyer, been practicing employment law for at least 20 years, which is probably giving all of you away my age. I think I found it particularly challenging when the Chancellor decided to announce changes to employment law every Friday night at 5:30 during lockdown, which I call beer o'clock in my house. And I was very upset that every Friday night I had to wait to listen to hear what the Chancellor said. So certainly if we can have change a little bit less quickly than that, or maybe on a different evening, I would be very, very grateful. But from a people perspective, there are some challenges that have come out of the COVID experience, and which I think are going to continue to be on managers, HR people, strategist desks, or indeed just as you know, on your own individual desk as you navigate this new dynamic. And one of those things is we're hearing constant dialogue about flexible working and being able to work from home, and what that's going to mean for people. And I'm always very conscious that for a large proportion of the workforce in the UK, they have been working in their normal physical workplace throughout all of this. And the option for them to work from home is simply not available. And I think it's very interesting, because we need to be very careful that we don't end up in completely two different in sort of trenches, where we've got the people who can and the people who cannot. So for those people who haven't been able to work flexibly or work from home, those issues around flexible working that we've had for years are just not going to go away. They're still going to have questions. And in fact, they're perhaps going to feel even more aggrieved now than they did 12 months ago, when they want to work flexibly. And there is a risk, I think, that we're going to have a bit of a societal divide there in terms of those who can and those who cannot. Managing those mismatched expectations is going to remain a challenge. There is also going to be the challenge of those businesses which decide they do want people back in the workforce, back in the workplace, and the employees who simply don't want to come back. And managing those expectations is also going to be very challenging. A number of employers have been starting to ask us about how do they make those working from home arrangements more permanent? How do they make changes to people's place of work in their contracts of employment, which perhaps seems, it's looking back at the contracts, but it is relevant, because if someone's place of work is an office as opposed to their home, questions arise around costs, provision of desks, health and safety assessments, chairs, screens, and all the rest of it. So when people are starting to permanently change places of work, there's going to be a wide range of issues, employment contracts and others, to think about. We're also starting to see niggles around all those extra bits and pieces that need to be done because of COVID, and actually who should be doing that. So who should be checking that the hand sanitizer is full? What happens when somebody doesn't think somebody's keeping their social distance in a workplace? Who's updating reports? Who's sharing data? Who's managing expectations around health and safety in environments which perhaps haven't been dominated by health and safety in the past? Because I think there are people who feel that they're being given COVID-related jobs which aren't part of their day-to-day job, and why should they be taking it on? And while people have been willing to do lots of extra work because of a public health crisis and that we're dealing with an emergency, some of that goodwill is starting to run dry a little bit, and we are starting to see issues around managing some of those extra duties and responsibilities. So from a managing people perspective, whether or not that's part of your formal function or just because you have colleagues, it's going to be interesting to see how that works in the dynamic. And I think what we're going to be looking for is for people to continue to be very flexible and to let us move and adapt with the times, because the way things are going to work is going to have to keep changing depending on people's individual circumstances, local lockdowns. Up here in Scotland, our schools are back, but there's already a whole year group in my kids' school who's been sent home 1 week in. We are going to continue to have chops and changes over the coming weeks and months. And so I think dealing with the change in duties, the changes in places of work are going to continue to be an issue. Another issue that we're coming up against at the moment as well are issues around confidentiality. Lots of people have been working from home, and when we were all in lockdown, nobody could see our desks because nobody was allowed into our homes. But issues around confidentiality when people are moving between each other's homes more often, is going to become more of a problem, and is something that you may need to be aware of. And certainly the ICO with Startus, the Information Commissioner, is starting to think about these issues in terms of what steps have businesses put in place to protect personal data when everybody's working from home. I get teased about my headset. I look a bit like a wannabe Madonna star, but it's, I use it so that when my clients are talking to me, my children, when I was in lockdown, who are teenagers, couldn't hear what my clients were saying to me, because that was important from a confidentiality perspective. There is also a sense in which there is becoming, as we've moved through lockdown and moving into the new dynamic, that the working from home, some people are just getting bored with it, that they're perhaps not paying as much attention as they used to, that they're perhaps tired, they haven't had what they would call a normal holiday, that they are stressed, they're anxious, and that fatigue is starting to build up. And those issues around well-being and fun and connectivity that perhaps we were all quite good at the beginning, ideas for Friday afternoon team chats are perhaps, running dry, and that there's going to need to be a lot more effort in terms of keeping people focused and engaged in their roles. The big issue from an employment law perspective is always going to be this refusal to return to work. What do you do when people refuse to return to work for COVID-related reasons because they're too anxious, they're upset, that they're worried? Even when you have put in place your appropriate health and safety assessment, you have made a COVID secure workforce and workplace, and what do you do in respect of that? And the challenge will be taking reasonable action in respect of your employees without crossing the line and taking detrimental action, which would trigger a whistleblowing claim. And very much as Jen was saying, the key here is going to be to communicate, and communicate and engage with your employees as much as possible. Demonstrate that you're listening, that you have taken on board their concerns, and that you are trying to support them as they return to work. As we've worked through this COVID period, one of the issues that has been very much in the news, of course, has been diversity. And unfortunately, given recent events in the United States in the last 48 hours, it remains, across the news that that Black Lives Matter and issues of race and other diversity issues are very much at people's the forefront of their mind. And I think it's important that during these challenging periods where they've got public health crisis, that managers and businesses do amplify their commitment and commentary on inclusion and diversity, so that all of the workforce feels united and is able to pull together as a team. And it's very important to be able to respond to the increased focus that we have in workplaces. And certainly a number of my clients are grappling with grievances from employees who felt the business just didn't respond, that they weren't vocal enough, that there wasn't enough of a response, that there may be things going on in the background, there may be working parties and various groups, but just not enough of a response. And very much that people want to know that diversity and inclusion has not been put on the back burner. And so from that perspective, I think it is important that we maintain that focus, and whether or not that is about, that's equality in all its shapes and sizes, and not just women, but more widely than that. But with this audience, of course, the connectivity and networking amongst women is so important to enable us to be on a level playing field. And from that perspective, I think it remains important that businesses raise individual and collective understanding of discrimination at work and the inequalities that there are there. A key issue is going to remain that point around representation and career progression, that we need women and people from a diverse background in senior leadership roles and leading from the front and putting their hand up and being seen, so that we are able to ensure that there is sensible and good and reasonable and equal progression of everybody in the workplace. And certainly from a perspective as managers, as leaders within our workplace, and for those of you who do work in strategy and HR, making sure that there is leadership around diversity and inclusion is, I think, going to remain something that differentiates your organisation and sets you apart within the workplace and the marketplace. So those were my thoughts on the key legal issues coming out of as we come through this new dynamic and this period of constant change. And at that point, I'll pass back to Hayley to introduce Dr. Bell.
Thanks, Alison. Okay, so I'm just going to now again, nearly ended the whole meeting then, pressing the wrong button. Panic moment. I'm just going to share this screen just so I can firstly introduce Dr. Linda Ball is a consultant occupational health physician and set up a business Medical Limited. And she's going to be talking to us about how COVID has impacted health and wellbeing, a time to reflect, take stock and accept our new normal. And Linda does have some slides to share, so I'm going to share those for you now as well.
You're on mute. I don't know if you realise.
You managed to unmute, Linda. Yeah, you've done it.
Sorry, I've gone to IT problems. I'm sorry, people. I'm not very familiar with Zoom. I'm working with every other IT at the moment, but you've gone to a tiny screen for me, so I don't know if you can help me out with that. It's gone to a very small screen, and I can't seem to enlarge it. Anyway, can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Right. Okay, well, so I've entitled my presentation as Health and Wellbeing, Sink or Swim. And the other thought is, are people waving or drowning at the moment? So I'll just go back to March when we were just working as normal, extremely busy, when suddenly everything stopped. It stopped for us because we had a couple of very difficult cases. We had one extremely aggressive person coming in, demanding a medical, even though he had just come back from abroad and had been advised to quarantine. But he came in demanding a face-to-face medical. We then had a couple of other similar situations with nurses going out on sites and coming in to see the nurse, and clearly had very personal contact with somebody who had coronavirus. So at that stage, we completely stopped all routine face-to-face medicals. And then, of course, there was a challenge of all new information coming in about coronavirus, quite a new situation, a new virus and new information, and probably for you all, totally overwhelmed with information coming out from all sorts of media, etc. So stopping all face-to-face, we had time then to sit back and look and decide how we're going to deal with this, how we're going to go forward. So at that point, I contacted the faculty, and I developed new guidance with the faculty for COVID, and developed a weekly bulletin for the Society of Occupational Medicine. And I think that resulted in some SOM webinars through CIPD, etc. So that kept me down to the coalface as to what was happening, new information coming out, and producing guidance. And then there was Oil and Gas UK and HSE produced new guidance on doing remote assessments. So suddenly we were allowed to do remote assessments where everything had to be done face-to-face before. So whole new challenges, new situation, and new ways of dealing with things. So we had to develop new procedures, video consultations, remote assessments via Teams, WhatsApp, FaceTime. New procedures on working from home, whole IT systems. So that was then. What's happening now? Main issues I'm dealing with now is coronavirus return to work. We had that initially, but people coming back from furlough now, getting back into work, and school teachers going back to school, universities going back. So a whole lot of people needing coronavirus risk assessments about safety, returning to work, etc. People who've been shielding. Somebody mentioned loss of confidentiality, people coming into our homes, etc. But there's a loss of confidentiality for those who have had very significant health conditions, but have happily worked away with no problem at all. And now suddenly everybody knows about it because they're trying to get back to work, but they have to tell them that they're actually shielding. Some people are actually terrified of returning to work, and others are desperate to return to work. And sometimes it's those who are least at risk for their health reasons who are most terrified, and others who really got quite used to having very significant health conditions and continue to work and desperate to get back. So it's trying to sort out what actual health issues are and what the risks are at the workplace. People are very grateful to have somebody to actually talk to them about their own personal risks and the risks at the workplace. But of course there's different government advice, England, Wales, Scotland and Northern Ireland, and trying to keep up to date with all the different areas, the different advice changing daily, and talking to people and telling them what their risks are. I had quite a funny situation recently where I was dealing with a company in Northern Ireland, strong Northern Ireland accent, and then somebody from Poland with a strong Northern Ireland accent and Polish, and then a translator with a strong Northern Ireland accent dealing with another country, a Lithuanian. So we've all got different situations to work through with this remote assessments. People home working with children running around, difficulties with IT as I'm having myself at the moment with the Zoom, sharing kitchen table with another home worker, all trying to do their working from home. Some people preferring to work from home because they find they can do it better, particularly accountants, finance people. They get more peace to get on with their work. But some, of course, can't because they're factory workers and they have to be actually at the workplace in order to do their work. There's all the issues of loneliness, of being furloughed, shielding, can't meet family, people have died and they can't, they can't socialise with their family, they can't go to the funerals, all that sort of thing. Frightened of the future, loss of job, loss of income. And then you get people who are complete COVID deniers who say, oh, this is an absolute load of nonsense, I don't believe in it, I don't see what the problem is. Doing remote medical, I've discovered that I'm actually doing a WhatsApp medical, and somebody's actually working in Argentina or working on a boat in the North Sea. So very unusual situations to deal with at the moment. The future. I think there's going to be a lot of changes. These changes are going to go forward, and there's a lot of good changes in a sense, because we've discovered that we can do remote medicals, and actually it saves us time, it saves the company time, it saves downtime for people coming to get an assessment. So there's a lot of things that can be done. Sometimes we've been doing things that have been traditional, we've always done it that way. And maybe we need to think, well, actually, do we need to do it that way? Can we do it another way? For instance, I'm just thinking about all these routine lung tests that we've done all these years. These have all stopped. Do we actually need to do them? What situation do we need to do them in? So I think there'll be a lot of rethinking about how we go forward. A lot of asking about flu jags at the moment. Maybe there'll be less flu because there's stricter personal hygiene now. How are we going to react as there are more waves of the virus in the future months? Maybe we'll have to accept a different level of risk going forward than we have been used to in the past. a lot of the companies have closed their offices, and that's it, finished. Some of the company next to us actually at our office completely closed. They decided that the workers were actually more productive working from home, so the office was closed. How many companies are going to do that? I don't know. So the vaccine, what's going to happen with that? How long will it take to roll it out to everybody? And well, there's just, we probably heard on the news yesterday that somebody has had coronavirus yet again. So how effective is a vaccine going to be? Is a vaccine going to be like the yellow fever where you have it once and that's it for your life? Or is it going to be like the flu virus where every few months the vaccine, the virus actually changes, so you've got to have a new vaccine every year? We don't know. So there are all these unknowns, unpredictables. And hey, I think we just have to be able to accept change, compromise, be flexible. And I think that's the only way to go forward to swim. So I've put some websites in, because there's the different government websites for England, Northern Ireland, Scotland and Wales for people. I think that's really all I want to say. I'm happy to answer any questions.
Thanks, Linda. Angie, can I hand over to you for the Q&A now?
Yeah, of course. Hello, everybody. I have some questions, and I'm sure you do too. So please do, whilst I introduce myself, take the time to think of a few questions to address to our panel. I'm sure we've all experienced some interesting times during lockdown, whether you've been working from home or been furloughed, and difficulties that you might have faced, or brilliant things that have happened that might be interesting to see whether the panel have experienced those things too. So just to introduce myself quickly, I'm Angie Needle. I'm Strategy Director at Cadent, which is a gas distribution network. And I'm co-founder of WUN. And you know what, I'm really pleased to see so many women, and there's a few chaps, I've spotted you, don't think I haven't, on the meeting today. And Angela Love, you're quite right, there's some lovely Scottish accents going on, so that's good. I can't pretend to take part in that, but and probably you wouldn't argue that I'm even a northerner, but I do live in Sheffield, so I'm not that. Great, so we've got a few questions coming in. Whilst I have a read of those, let me just direct a question to Jen, if that's all right, Jen.
Yep.
You talked early on about how you've pivoted as a company during the do we call it a crisis yet? Probably. So tell me a little bit more about what that pivot was like, and how you've changed, adapted your business to meet customers' needs. And obviously during lockdown, it's been challenging. That'd be great to hear more about that.
Yeah, I think it started with, obviously, as a business in utilities, we've been probably quite traditional approach, Monday to Friday, 9 to 5 in the office, and we have our field-based teams. I think the first pivot for us was that huge jump from home working, from office working to home working, should I say. It started probably in earnest about 10 days before the lockdown. We started to think about those potentially at risk. And again, having to identify those people who previously perhaps hadn't identified themselves. We started to see people having to isolate, children being sent home from school. And I think we quickly realised that this could be the way forward. So I think that switch, whilst it seems like we'll all just work from home, that presented huge challenges. Not everyone had kits, not everyone had equipment. We had to obviously go from maybe 20 to 50 people working on a VPN to 600 overnight. So yeah, there were some huge challenges there. And I think that huge pivot again for us was then when we had to actually consider furloughing some of our workers. So as a business, we've grown year on year. but actually some of these government measures meant we couldn't do the day-to-day job. You know, we were starting to see customers who were closing down their environments and asking us not to attend. And really, we did have to stop and say, what's the safe thing to do here? What's the right thing to do here? And then we had to act very, very quickly. And then we've continued to pivot as we've come out of lockdown. You know, we started to see people really return to more active duties from about June onwards. And then that brought with it all the employment challenges of bringing people back into the office, getting them back into sites. Construction is relatively easy to close down, but a real challenge to open back up. And it takes time and planning. We were also pivoting again now. We are now thinking about the next steps, which will see people back in the office. I'm here today, and I'm looking out to a sea of perspex screens, face coverings, hand sanitizers, temperature checks. You know, we've got one-way systems.
Yeah.
You know, our welcome system where we would normally log in, which is our kind of entry system, is now asking if you're displaying any COVID symptoms today. So it's just a constant change for us. And really, to pick up on what Alison said, we're really keen to make sure that we have anticipated people's fears and anxieties about a return. And until I think such times as COVID is no longer with us, or we do have a vaccine that cures the world, we just have to do as much as we can, and hope that our people trust in us, that we've put them at the centre of our plans.
Thank you, Jennifer. And it's interesting because we've got some questions coming in now, so I'll come to those in a minute. But one of the questions I've got for you all, and we can take it in turn, is that I don't feel like I really need to go back to an office. I've clearly demonstrated that I can do my job as, if not more effectively, from home without the commute. I get more sleep and I spend more time with my family. It is tiring being on Zoom calls all day long, if I'm really honest. Feels like I've been driving all day, but it is a different, and we've all got used to it now, I think, to a certain extent. How do you see the real enticement for people to want to go back to an office? How do you see that being phased in, regardless or not whether it's written into their contract, actually? So it'd be good to get your thoughts.
Yeah, I think we're seeing a bit of both, Angela, to be honest. I think a lot of people have definitely recognised some benefits, but I think as this continues, people are also missing the social interaction. I think there's a question on the chat here around culture. And as a business, we've surveyed our employees throughout to ask how they're feeling, and we do have a number of people who are happy with those at-home measures, but we're finding increasingly we're getting more people who are growing frustrated and tired and anxious of those same at-home measures. So I think for us, it is an opportunity for us to try and look at best of both worlds. I think for us as a business, our culture thrives on us being together, and you can't take away from walking past someone and stopping for a chat and getting something done versus trying to slot into someone's Zoom calendar of a day. So I think our next steps is yet again another kind of pulse survey, just to really for us keep checking the temperature, just to see where people are at. I think we're also finding a lot of parents whose children are either now back at school or are about to head back to school and childcare. Again, I can speak from personal experience. They might actually be able to work from home now without children. But again, I think as adults, as humans, we crave that social interaction with one another. So I don't think one size fits all.
I think one of the challenges that we see a lot of our clients are trying to work to deal with is the sort of double end, the two ends of performance and progression. So a lot of more junior people within workplaces learn a lot by osmosis. If you know what, simply the watching and sitting in on having the chance to witness good behaviour, good cultural behaviour, watching people who are more senior just because they overhear things in the workplace. They get a chance to learn from more than just the people within their direct team. They get that horizontal view, which particularly if you're, for example, a woman and everyone you work with is a man, being able to see that there are women who are successful in the business is something that's going to be really challenging. And then the reverse of that, managing poor performance when it's done over Zoom. Now that's something, a lot of performance management issues have been very much put in the cooler during this period, because nobody has the bandwidth to deal with performance at this point. But having effective productivity and performance conversations over Zoom, when people can give the impression of being able to hide, particularly when you're also balancing anxiety and mental health concerns. And then the question, which as an employment lawyer, or the comment that's made to me a lot as an employment lawyer, that Dr. Bell may receive much less of because she's a doctor, is the expression, people are at it. And the assumption that people are at it, or that's a conversation people will have with their lawyer more than they probably have with their doctor. And I think that's going to be really challenging, whereas in the physical workplace, there's a perception that that's easier. I don't know whether or not it is easier, but I know that I'm managing performance in my own, in my own team. And I find it's easier to speak with somebody because I know that they physically feel they have more space because they're on Zoom and they're not in a room with me. And so, they're able to take breaks more easily and be in their own space when they want a break. And that maybe helps. So there are some upsides and some downsides, but I think that's an issue with the not physically having a workplace. So a lot of my clients,
Alison, let's talk about that some more, because one of the brilliant questions that's just come in from Georgina is actually about culture and how, this two-dimensional world that we're now in is interfering, if you like, with the culture. And Jennifer, you alluded to it, which is you can't learn from each other. There isn't the sort of feeling that you get when you're in the office together. So how do you think that culture is going to be rescued, if you like, or adapted to take account of this diversity of working practices that we've now got? Do you want to go first, Alison, and then Jennifer and Linda?
I think the interesting thing is that at the moment we've very much been working in the extreme. So for those of you who do have caring responsibilities at any of a variety, and not just school kids, we've been at home, forced to be at home. It wasn't an option to have a blended approach. It was, you will work from home for a number of us, or you will have to keep working in the normal way or you've been on furlough. And there's a lot of resentment and challenge because it was all very binary. There isn't the opportunity to be flexible. And I think as we talk very much about the returning to work, it is very much thinking flexibly, what works for the whole workforce, what works for the whole team. And so culture is massively important. And that means that employers are absolutely able to say, for example, I want my team in every Tuesday. So you can work from home the rest of the time, but I want you in every Tuesday, or I want you in 3 days a quarter. So employers shouldn't be reluctant to, I guess a very old-fashioned term, but put their foot down and make demands which ensure that you're able to maintain, drive forward your culture that you want. And so it is important that as you move to the new dynamic, that it remains flexible and that the culture isn't lost, that development, diversity isn't lost because it suits everybody to work from home. So you are allowed to be demanding, and you are allowed to force people to answer a question back into the workplace. Ultimately, if in the same way as in any other environment, if you need them to work and they're not able to, employment law does give you the right to force it, and if they can't, to then take the normal steps that you would take.
Interesting. Jennifer, have you got any points on culture? Especially how we adapt culture. Has it had an impact on energy assets, good or bad?
I think it has already. It is adapting. I don't think it's about will we or won't we. It's already happening in front of us. I think one of the benefits we've found in order to stay in touch with people, we set up a senior management group where we had weekly updates with around 90 managers across the business. We asked everyone to turn their cameras on. We wanted to look at everyone. Those 90 managers got to see the leadership team all together at the one time. So I think in some ways it's our distance has brought us together. You know, I've got a team and we're, you know, some of us are remote, and there's been comments even amongst us that we feel more of a team because we don't pick up a mobile phone anymore and talk. We don't need to travel up and down the country, but we look at each other, we talk every day. You know, and we've also introduced just small things like, you know, we'll just phone and have a coffee. It's just a coffee break. So I think in some ways it's, you know, we are still aware of that culture, but I do think in order to ensure that we keep some of the things that we did build, it is important, going back to what Alison said, that we do make that leap back in. You know, yes, we'll do it safely. Yes, we'll do it in a timely manner. Yes, we'll do it together. But we do all need to do it. You know, I think it's important.
Yeah, and we haven't got that long left actually for questions. So if you could, Linda, please, yeah.
Yeah. From our perspective, because we're dealing with all different organisations, different types of work, there's been a very obvious difference between those that are well managed and those that are poorly managed. Those that are well managed have got in there, they're looking at what controls should be put in place, they're putting things into place, they're talking to the workers, but some companies just haven't got there, and it's really, there's quite a divergence. But also there's a difference between the blue collar workers and the white collar, in that office workers are able to work from home, etc. And there's quite a separation now between the two. Whereas in many workplaces, you know, everybody would be in together and be sort of communication. So I think there's quite a difference between those groups in firms. And I think, as somebody said, okay, we've been in an urgent situation, we've had to react, but long term, I'm not sure how that's going to actually pan out with regards to the culture. I think you have to be together to make a culture and realise that, and there is a lot of picking up from people, new people in, about what the organisational ethos is, etc.
Yeah, thank you for that. It's really interesting. And so, well, I've got a couple of legal questions as well for you, Alison. One is, can you force, I'm going to give you two in one go. Number one is, can you force people back to work into the office if they don't want to, or they're scared? And the other one is, how do you get people to take their annual leave when actually they're just bobbing in and doing a bit of work anyway, even though they're supposed to be off work? And how do we make rest genuinely rest when really they're just in the same four walls as they have been previously? It doesn't really feel like a break, does it? But anyway, there's
taking the holiday one first. There are two issues there. One is, you can require that employees take their leave provided you give them enough notice. You have to give them enough. If you want someone to take 1 week of leave, for example, you must give them at least one, advance notice, at least 1 week's advance notice of that leave. So you can force people to take it. In terms of ensuring that they actually take the rest, because the holiday is there to give people a genuine rest, employers have never been particularly proactive about things like shutting off iPhones or removing access to IT systems. And I don't expect that many employers are going to start to be that proactive. And certainly it's incumbent on individual people to ensure that they do take their own holiday if they've taken the leave. And if they dabble and dip in and out, then that's at their risk, save where somebody is disabled or there is a mental health concern where you do have obligations to put in place reasonable adjustments. And if that includes perhaps ensuring that there are controls in place, for example, restricting access to IT, etc., that might be something that's looked at. But most employers are to date willing to let people dabble while on holiday, but certainly I think it's going to become something that's more challenging where performance is affected. Certainly if you give an instruction to an employee, do not work while on holiday, and they break that instruction, they then haven't had the leave and rest they need, and that affects their performance, they have failed to comply with a reasonable instruction. So there, there are options there. And the reasonable instruction point is the same point in terms of telling people to get back to work. If it's a safe workplace and they don't have underlying health conditions, provided they're not disabled and you've properly communicated, you can ultimately look at giving employees a reasonable instruction, which is if we expect you to be at work. If you're not at work, then you're effectively on unauthorised leave and the normal consequences will follow. I would say that's the nuclear button. I would hope that most people will not get there. Good communication engagement is going to be key. But ultimately, and especially where it's anxiety related, health related, you really will need to be careful of taking each person's circumstances. Their individual subjective reality is their reality, and you can't be dismissive of that. And I think that will become very challenging for people. But ultimately, pay doesn't need to be paid if people are refusing to work, and you need them to be working.
Yeah, thank you. Look, it's been an absolutely fantastic debate. We've actually got more questions as well, which we'll circulate, and if we can get the answers, we'll pop those on our social media sites, because the debate could go for quite some time. And I just wanted to, well, first of all, thank you to everybody who's attended. I hope you found it informative. A big thank you to the panel. You did a great job, and to Energy Assets for supporting this one event. I've certainly learnt a lot about some of the legal issues that we need to think about, and I've recruited some people during lockdown as well, so trying to get them working in the team is quite interesting. So Hayley, if we've got the last slide, I just want to tell you about future one events. Our next session is on the 23rd of September. And at that event, we will be talking about how to build a lasting positive mindset. I know one of the, I was going to say flaws or failures, but one thing that makes women is often we are lacking in confidence in comparison to our counterparts. That doesn't mean we shouldn't do something about it. And so we're going to put on a great webinar about that on the 23rd of September. So please do sign up on the usual social media links, and you'll be able to get a ticket on Ticket Tailor. But lastly, thank you to you all, and to Hayley and the One team for setting up the session. And that's all from us. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks everyone.
Thank
Bye.
you. Bye.
Bye.